أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رسولا ونبيا ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Continuing on with the Prophet ﷺ's legendary military government legacy, the era of Sayyidina Umar bin Al-Khattab. This will be video number 51, as we have completed a total of 30 videos in the Prophet ﷺ's legendary military career, and another 50 videos, the era of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the Prophet ﷺ's legendary military legacy. And now this series is the era of Sayyidina Umar bin Al-Khattab, the Prophet ﷺ's legendary government military legacy, and discussing the lessons and morals of the 4-day battle of Qadisiyah. Picking up from page number 209, in the mobilization for this battle, we see a new idea that was previously unknown to the Muslims. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu did not wait in Sirar until his army was complete before setting off for Iraq. Rather, he set out with 4,000 men and reached the battle site in Al-Qadisiyah with 17,000 mujahideen. This was an innovative way of mobilizing the army which was unknown to the Muslims before Umar radiyallahu anhu's era. In his letters to both Al-Muthanna and Sa'ad, Umar told them where this decisive battle was to be fought, and that was at Al-Qadisiyah. Umar was the first Muslim leader to use maps in studying the land and environment of the battle. When he asked Sa'ad to describe the land to him in a detailed letter telling him where the Muslims' camps were, so that it was as if he could see it, and to give him a clear picture of the Muslim situation, Sa'ad wrote him a letter in which he described in detail the geography of Al-Qadisiyah between the ditch and the Atiq River, and what lay to the right and left. Then he described the environment in the surrounding land and told him that the local inhabitants were hostile towards the Muslims. Based on this, the Caliph made his tactical and strategic decision from the time they arrived in the enemy's land. The Muslims used the tactic of raiding enemy supplies and exhausting them in this manner. These raids met the army's need for supplies. In addition to that, they also served another important purpose, which was sapping the energy of the enemy and the ability of the local people to withstand the burdens and suffering of war. The Muslims also used the tactic of ambushing in their skirmishes with the Persians before Al-Qadisiyah actually took place, and in their efforts to exhaust the enemy and weaken their morale. Bakir ibn Abdullah al-Laythi, along with a group of Muslim horsemen, ambushed a caravan in a stand of date palms on the road to As-Sanin, in which the sister of Azad Mard, the son of Azad Ba, the ruler of Al-Hira, was being taken as a bride to the ruler of As-Sanin. When the caravan reached the place of ambush, the Muslims attacked it. Bakir broke the back of Shirazad, the son of Azad Ba, the brother of the bride, who was the head of the cavalry that was riding ahead of the caravan. The horses fled galloping away with their riders. The Muslims seized all the other loads and captured the daughter of Azad Ba, along with 30 women folk of the chieftains and 100 followers, and the value of the goods they were carrying with them is unknown. In this battle, the Muslims changed their tactics according to new developments on the battlefield. On the first day, we see them trying to tackle the elephants, cutting their ropes after shooting them with arrows until they fled from the battlefield. They were awaiting reinforcements from Syria, and they brought the reinforcements to the battlefield in groups, one after another, to alarm the enemy with their apparent numbers. Then they tried a brilliant trick of dressing up their camels and putting masks on them to make them look like elephants. They sent them into the enemy ranks, where they terrified the horses and made them flee. On the third day, the Muslims again tackled the Persian elephants with their protected and who were protected by horsemen and foot soldiers. They attacked the biggest elephant, stabbing it in the eyes and cutting off its trunk. The elephants fled, and the Persians and Muslims became on an equal footing in the battlefield. After the Persians lost their elephants, which were like tanks for them. When the Muslims saw that the fight was going to be a lengthy one, they decided on a general attack. They set their ranks in order and marched as one as soon as the enemy began to retreat and the core of the army became exposed. Rustam, the leader of the enemy's army, became their target. When they finished off the Rustam, the Persian army suffered a crushing defeat. Thus, we see that the methods used by the Muslimin in this battle were not restricted to traditional methods at all of fighting. Rather, they responded to every situation with what was best. They moved away from primitive methods such as single combat to tactical moves such as disguising their camels, cutting the ropes of the elephants, stabbing them in the eyes, and cutting off their trunks, and using classical methods of fighting such as targeting the leader. This battle was distinguished by mobilization along tribal lines, the advantage of which was that there was competition among the tribes in fighting. These are some of the Islamic military methods used by the Mujahideen in the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. Moving along now to page number 212, the conquest of Al-Mada in Ctesiphon. Saad stayed in Al-Qadisiyah for 2 months, awaiting instructions from Sayyidina Umar ibn Al-Khattab until there came the command to conquer Al-Madain and to leave the women and children in Al-Atiq with many soldiers around them. He told him that the soldiers who stayed behind should have a share of the booty too, because they were staying behind to guard the families of the Muslimin. Saad did that and set out with the army towards the end of Shawwal. The remnants of the defeated army, among whom were the remaining commanders who were determined to defend themselves, had gone to Babil. The cities and towns of Persia began to fall one after another. The Muslimin conquered Al-Burs, then Babil after crossing the Euphrates, then Kutha, then Sabat, part of it by force and part of it by means of peace deals. The organized campaign of the Muslimin continued until they reached Al-Madain. Umar told Saad to be kind to the peasants and to fulfill the covenants with them, and a huge number of peasants came under Muslim protection. The peasants were moved by the attitude, justice, and equality of the Muslim army, which stemmed from their great religion, where their leader and the least one among the common folk were equal before the greater truth. There was no oppression, no corruption in the land, and they were no longer subject to tyranny or enslavement such as they used to suffer. They became slaves of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu alone. Saad headed towards Al-Madain on Umar's orders. He sent the vanguard of the army on ahead under the leadership of Zuhra ibn al-Haw, followed by Abdullah ibn al-Mu'atham with a part of the army, and Shahrabil ibn as-Samat with another part. Then Hashim ibn Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas, whom he had made his deputy instead of Khalid ibn Urfuta, Then Sa'd joined them with the rest of the army and appointed Khalid ibn Urtufa in command of the rear guard. Zuhra, at the head of the vanguard, headed towards Al-Madain, which was the capital of the Persian state. The city straddled the Tigris west and east, or it straddled the Tigris east and west. The part which lay to the west of the river was called Bahur Sir, and the part that lay to the east was called Asbanir and Ctesiphon. Zuhra arrived at Bahur Sir and started to lay siege to the city. Then Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu took the Muslim army, accompanied by the commander of his forces, his nephew Hashim ibn Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas, to the west part of Al-Madain, where the king of Persia Yazdagir was. The Muslims besieged the city for 2 months, with the Persians coming out sometimes to fight the Muslims but unable to defeat them. Zuhra ibn al-Haywiyash was struck by an arrow because he was wearing chainmail that had a hole in it. They had said to him, "Why don't you get this hole fixed so that arrows cannot penetrate it?" He said, "Why?" They said, "We fear for you." He said, "I will be dear to Allah if an arrow misses all these soldiers and comes to me through this hole and strikes me firmly." And he was indeed dear to Allah as he had hoped, and he was the first of the Muslimin to be struck by an arrow that day. It struck him firmly through that hole, and some of them said, "Pull it out for him." He said, "Let me be, for I will still be able to carry on if it is still in me, and I hope that I can still strike some of them." He marched towards the enemy and struck Shahrawayar, who was from Astaqbhar, and killed him. The Muslims continued the siege for 2 months using 20 catapults, and that the Persians who were allied with them had assisted them in building. This indicates that the Sahabas did not neglect any material means of victory if they were able to use it, and they fully understood the words of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, who states, "And make ready against them all you can of power." Surah number 8, ayah number 60. In addition to their excellence in terms of spiritual means of victory, the most important of which are relying on Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, remembering Him through dhikr and calling upon Him in supplication. Allah is with His close friends by His support and help. 2.6.1. It was narrated that Anas ibn al-Halli said, "Whilst we were besieging Bahur Sir, a messenger looked out at us and said, 'The king says to you, is there any way to make peace deal by which we will have what is on our side between the Tigris and our mountain, and you will have what is on your side between the Tigris and your mountain? Are you not satisfied? May you never be satisfied.'" Abu Mubassir al-Aswad ibn Qutbah spoke up before anyone else, and Allah caused him to speak words that neither he nor we understood. Then the man went back, and we saw them crossing the river to the east of Al-Madain. We asked, "O Abu Mubassir, what did you say to him?" He said, "By the one who sent Muhammad with the truth, I do not know what it was, but I feel content, and I hope that I was made to say something good." The people came asking him the same question, one after the other, until Sa'd heard of that, and he came to us. He said, "O Abu Mufazzir, what did you say? For by Allah, they are running away." And he told him the same as he had told us. He called out to the Persians, but no one came out of the city except one man who asked for safe passage, which was granted to him. He said, "There is no one left inside. What is stopping you?" So the men entered the city and conquered it. We did not find anyone or anything inside of the city except a few prisoners who we took captives. We asked them and that man why the people had fled, and they said, "The king sent word to you offering a peace treaty, and you told him that there would be never any peace treaty between us and you until we eat honey in Kuthi. The king said, what is this? The angels are speaking on their lips and answering us on behalf of the Arabs. By Allah, what this man says indicates that we are going to be finished. So seek protection on the other side of the city. The verses which Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas recited when he reached Lam Sabat. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu stopped in Lam Sabat after Hashim and those who were with him came to Bahur Sir, which was the western part of Al-Madain. When Sa'd stopped in that place, he recited the words and warned, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, mankind of the day when the torment would come unto them. Then the wrongdoers will say, our Lord, respite us for a little while. We will answer your call and follow the messenger. It will be said, had you not sworn for a time that you will not leave the world for the hereafter? This is the Quran, Surah number 14. Ayah number 44. He recited these ayahs because in that place there were troops of Khosrows called Buran, who swore by Allah every day that the Persian kingdom would never perish so long as they live. Zuhra ibn al-Hawiyya defeated them and scattered them before he was martyred. Then the Muslims entered Bahur Sir in the middle of the night. They saw the white palace, which was the palace of Khosrows. Dirar ibn Al-Khattab said, Allahu Akbar. The white palace of Khosrows, this is what Allah and His Messenger promised. And they continued to say takbir until dawn came. Consultation between Sa'd and his troops about crossing the river. When Sa'd realized that Khosrows had crossed the river to the eastern part of Madain, taking all the boats with him, he became confused. The enemy was in front of him with nothing between them except the river, but there was no way to cross it because there were no boats. He was afraid that his enemy would move on and it would become difficult to finish them off. Then some of the Persians came to Sa'd and showed him a ford where they could cross the river with some risk. Sa'd refused and hesitated. Then the river burst into banks and its water turned black and started foaming because the water was running so fast. At that point, Sa'd saw a good dream in which he saw the Muslim heroes crossing the river, and he interpreted the dream as meaning that they would cross. He gathered the people in praise and glorified Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Then he said, your enemies have protected themselves from you by means of this river, and you cannot reach them but they can reach you if they wish in their boats. There is nothing behind you to make you fear an attack from the rear, for the previous Mujahideen have taken care of them for you. I think that you should hasten to launch jihad against your enemy, and I have decided to cross this river and go after them. They all said, may Allah guide us and you do it. We learn the following lessons from this report. We are reminded that Allah is with His believing close friends and supports and helps them. The good dreams that Sa'd had saw were from Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, and they made him steadfast and encouraged him to go ahead with in this manner, the consequences of which were unknown, and Allah Jalla Jalaluhu would cause the consequences to be in the believer's favor. The river suddenly started to foam quickly in an unusual manner, and it would appear that this was in the Persian interest because it would prevent the Muslims from attempting to cross the river, but in fact it was in the Muslims' interest because it gave the Kafir a sense of security and they were unprepared. for a sudden attack by the Muslimin. They could not carry with them all that they wanted when they ran away. The Sahaba were greatly cheered by this dream of a righteous man, and it was a factor that encouraged them to go ahead and cross the river. They thought positively of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and considered good dreams as a means of support from Him. The Muslim leaders at the time of the rightfully guided Khalifas were, for the most part, decisive men who made the most of every opportunity to motivate their troops with their enthusiasm and strength of faith. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu ordered his army to cross over to the enemy with the weapons of security and piety, content with his troops' level of faith. So he went ahead relying upon the help of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, then upon the high level of faith among his men, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and the Tabi'een rahimahumullah were with them, or who were with them, were characterized by their complete obedience to their leaders. They regarded this obedience as a shar'i obligation and a righteous deed through which they drew closer to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. 2.6.4 Crossing the river and the conquest of Al-Madain. Sa'd told the people to cross the river, saying, "Who can protect the east side of the river so that the people may cross safely?" He delegated Asim ibn Amr at-Tamimi, who was a strong and tough man, to protect it, and he sent him with 600 elite troops, putting Asim in charge of them. He marched with them until they reached the bank of the Tigris. Then he said, "Who will come with me to defend the river bank from your enemy, and we will protect you until you have crossed." 60 strong men joined him, and they crossed the Tigris, and the rest of the 600 followed them. Thus, from the Muslim army was formed an elite group numbering 600 men, mujahideen, who were known as the Ahwal Squadron. From them, Asim selected 60 men under his own leadership to form the vanguard of this group. This was wise planning, first on the part of Sa'd, then Asim, because facing difficulties and taking risks cannot be done by a large number. Rather, it should be done by the strongest and toughest who have the best fighting skills, even if they just are a few. If others who were less qualified and less courageous joined this group, then retreated when the enemy attacked, this would cause the defeat of the entire group. Asim crossed the river with 60 men on horseback. It is reported that the scouts who went on ahead to the other side were Asam, Bani, Walad, At-Tamimi, At-Timi, Al-Khalaj, Ad-Dabai, Abu Mufazir, Al-Aswad ibn Qutba, Shahrabil ibn Asamat Al-Kindi, Hajil Al-Hajli, Malik ibn Ka'b Al-Hamdani, and a young man from Banu Al-Harith ibn Ka'b. When the Persians saw them, they prepared horsemen to fight them, and they met near the eastern bank of the river. Azim said, "Spears, spears," and directed them to aim them in their eyes. They met in battle, and the Muslims aimed at their eyes. The Persians fled towards the river bank, with the Muslims stabbing at their horses with their spears to make them run away faster. They started galloping away, and their riders could not control them. The Muslims pursued them and killed most of them. Those who got away fled one-eyed. Then the rest of the 600 caught up with their brothers in Al-Islam, and they took control of the eastern bank of the river. The Muslims crossed the river. When Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas saw that Asim had gained control of the river bank, he gave the people permission to cross the river. He said, "Say we seek the help of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. We put our trust in Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Allah is sufficient for us Jalla Jalaluhu, and He is the best disposer of our affairs Jalla Jalaluhu." There is no power and no strength except by Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, the Most High, the Almighty. Most of the enemy crossed over on horseback with the horses white, wading deep in the foaming most of the army crossed over on horseback with the horses wading deep in the foaming and black water of the Tigris, and the people chatting as they used to chat whilst traveling on land. The one who was traveling alongside Sa'd in the water was Salman ibn al-Farisi, and the horses started swimming with them on their backs. And Sa'd was saying, Allah is sufficient for us and He is the best disposer of affairs. Allah will most certainly grant victory to His friends and will support His religion. Allah will defeat His enemies. So long as there is no transgression or sin among the army that outweighs their good deeds. Salman said to him, Islam is new, and by Allah, the rivers and seas have been subjugated to them as the land is subjugated by the one in whose hand is the soul of Salman. People will leave al-Islam in crowds just as they enter it in crowds. What Salman meant by saying al-Islam is new, that it was still alive and its followers were strong in faith and proud of it. Al-Islam was the focal point of their lives, for which they lived and died. They called people to it and they defended it, but later on there would come generations who would inherit this religion and would not be Muslim by choice, and it will not be the focal point of their concerns and feelings. Rather, all their concern will be focused on worldly achievements and enjoying the pleasures of this world. Al-Islam would become a secondary concern in their lives. At that point, they would go out of Al-Islam in crowds, just as they had entered it in crowds. Inshallah, we will stop here and pick it up from page number 220, paragraph number 2. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik wa tabaraka asmu rabbik wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.